Hi, this is Simon Upstill and welcome to another tutorial for Apple Motion. And today we're going to be taking a look at a project that has a rather dull sounding name, but I think the effect is really rather impressive. So each of these paths actually exists in 3D space, as you can see. And I think the combined effect of that is really quite interesting. So let's make a start on this. So first of all, let's check on our project setup. So let's come over here, 1920 1080, 60 frames a second. This is important in order to get our shapes nice and smooth. And I'm going with a duration of 20 seconds. So then I'm going to come over and I'm going to come to import, and I'm going to import the thing called floor, and the thing called sidewall will be coming back for the other image later on. So import those, select them both, come over to properties and reset their scale to 100%. I'm just going to turn off the sidewall while I work on the floor. So I want this crack to be running the other way, so I'm going to rotate it through 90 degrees on Z and negative 90 on X, and then I'm going to bring it down negative 500 on Y. Let's turn back on the side wall, which is actually going to be the back wall, in fact, in this case, and let's set its position to negative 1000. And we need to bring it up 500 pixels on Y. Then let's duplicate this side wall, so right-click, duplicate, over, and let's rotate it through 90 degrees on Y. And let's move it over on X, negative 1000. And we also need to zero out that Z position. And then we can simply duplicate it, right-click, duplicate, and come over to properties and set this X position to positive 1000. So that's the opposite wall there. Now, the problem about this is that it doesn't really look like a real room. And that's because it's missing the ambient occlusion that you get in the corners. Let's actually make this 3D and add a light so you can see. Those corners just don't look realistic. But what we can do is we can add our own ambient occlusion by coming down and selecting the rectangle tool. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and draw a square. I'm going to turn off fill, going to turn on outline, and I'm going to make this color black. And then I'm going to set that width to something like 30. Don't worry, we're actually going to blur this, so it's not going to look anything like that. So let's first of all come to geometry. We need to set its size to 2000. And then we need to come to its position, and let's reset it. And then we need to move it back on Z. So we're going to move it back like that, and you can see that it needs to sit somewhere like that, and it's actually negative 999. But we also need to move it up on Y, so let's move that up by 500 pixels on Y. And so what we can do is we can add a Gaussian blur to this, so filters Gaussian blur, and let's set that amount up to something like 100. And you can see how that's actually now helped create the sense that there are actually real corners in here. So we're actually going to make a clone of this. So right click, make clone layer, and we just need to do the other corners. So let's first of all do the floor. So negative 90 on the X rotation. We need to bring it down to negative 499 on Y. And the reason for that is we want it to be 1 pixel above the existing floor. That's the reason I'm subtracting 1 from one of these numbers. And let's zero out that Z value. We could do the side walls. I'm actually not going to bother, but if you want to be purist about this, you probably need to do the side walls. The thing is, our scene is actually going to be so dark that this is probably a detail too far, but I just wanted to show you it anyway. So as you can see, I've just gone through and added in the ambient occlusion for those side walls as well. And if we switch to perspective view, this is what our room is now looking like. And I'm just going to disable that ambient occlusion so you can see it. I'm going to turn off the overlays like that. And there you go. You can see the difference that makes. That doesn't really look realistic, whereas this looks a whole load better. So let's now talk about creating our 3D paths. So obviously the usual way of making a path in Motion is to grab the Bezier tool and to draw out a path like this. Let's center it up. And turn off the fill just so we've got this outline like this. I'm just going to quickly turn off its lighting so you can see it more clearly. So the thing about this is that it's entirely 2D. And if we turn it on its side, so rotate it through 90 degrees on Y, you can see it becomes invisible. It's just this one pixel line. And that's no good because we actually want this to be properly 3D. So we won't actually be able to use a Bezier shape. And also we can't, we could turn it on its side, but we can't sort of bend it in all the different directions that we want. So let's not do that. Let's delete that. And let's instead do it with a particle system. So I'm going to come down and I'm going to select the circle tool. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and draw out a small circle. I'm going to center it up, come over to Shape, Geometry. I want this radius to be 15. Come over to Style, and let's soften it off by having a feather of -10. So then let's turn this into an emitter. So Object, Make Particles. I'm going to move down the timeline just a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the lighting for this. So turn that off, because we want this to be a light source, not to be affected by the light. So coming back to the emitter, what we need to do is we need to turn on the 3D switch. For the birth rate, I'm going to set that value to 120, but I'm also going to, while I'm here, add it to a rig, add to rig, create new rig, new slider. And that'll be obvious while we're doing that later on. So let's come back here. For the life, I want to go with 14. So that's 14 seconds. I want no speed randomness. That's really important. And I'm just going to open up the gradient here, opacity over life, make a little tab there, another one here, another one there. So this last one here, which I've dragged all the way to the end, I'm going to set the opacity to 0. And the first one, I'm going to set its opacity to 0 as well. I'm going to click on this tab here and just set its position to something like 4. So it fades in very, very quickly. And then gradually over life, they will sort of fade out. Let's set this location of this one here to something like, 80. So then, as you probably know, if I were to animate the position of this emitter, the particles would form a shape. So the way I'm actually going to animate it is using a motion path. So with the emitter selected, I'm going to come to Basic Motion and Motion Path. I'm just going to come to 7 seconds on the timeline because I only want the motion path to run for that long. And then with the motion path selected, I'm going to hit O on the keyboard. And you can see that what that's doing is it's drawing me a line that runs out like that to the right. And that's because if we open up the motion path control points, you can see we've got a starting point of 0, 0, 0 on the 3 axes, and the end point is at 1536 on X for whatever reason. So then what I want to do is I want to come over to View, and let's just turn off the 3D overlays because they're confusing, but we do want to turn on the 2D overlays, so Show Overlays. And if I zoom out a bit, you can see the path. We've got a keyframe here at 0, and off to the side here we've got the other one. So I'm going to just bring that in like that. And let's zoom in again. And what I can do here is I can hold down the Option key and I can click to make a couple of extra points on this path, like so. And then I can drag that up like that, drag this down like this, and drag like that. So we've now got a 2D path. But if I turn back on my 3D overlays and we come to our perspective view and we just sort of roll around a bit, you'll see what I can do is I can move them not only on X and Y, but also on Z. So if you now see what happens, so I need to actually come to the end of my motion path like that, so you can see the full extent of it, and you can see that they've drawn this path in all three axes like this, and I can adjust them. I'm going to make sure to leave that that first one where it is, because that's really quite important for the animation that I want to do. But I can very easily kind of adjust these Bezier handles so I can get an interesting looking result. This one here, I want to set that to smooth, just so I can put a nice little kink in the end of it like that. And I'm just not going to waste too much of your time showing you how to do this. The longer the handles, the smoother those corners are going to be, and that's probably a desirable thing. So anyway, you can see how that's now working. So let's come back to the active camera view, and we've got this interesting looking path like this. So what we can then do is we can adjust its color. So come to the color mode and pick colorize, and let's go for something like this. And then what we can do is we can duplicate this emitter to have another instance of it. So right click, duplicate, and let's turn off the first one while we work. Let's reselect the motion path so we can see those control points. Let's switch back to perspective view, because it's probably the easiest way of doing this. And what we might just do is turn off these side walls, just so we can get a better feel for how this is all working. As I say, we want to leave that one in the middle there. So I'm going to drag out like that. Actually, let's turn the other one back on again. Might as well, so we can see how we're changing this in a different way. So let's drag these points around so we've got a different sort of result. Let's look at our front view, kind of switch back and forward between them just to see how it's all looking. That's probably quite good. Maybe just adjust this so we've got more of a sweep in there. As I say, I'm not going to get too carried away. Stop me if I do. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the color of this. So come back into that color there. Let's go for that, I think. And then we can duplicate this one more time. So right click, duplicate. And again, let's probably switch to our perspective view just so we can get a feel for it. We need to have the motion path selected, and then we can just again leaving this one here in the middle. We don't want to touch that. Let's just make sure we've got a different sort of path for this. I'm going to do quite like these loops, so I'm going to probably stick with sort of looping for this. Don't forget also to kind of have it come out on the Z-axis in a different way. And I think what I want to do with this one is I want to send it shooting off to the back like that for its end position. So now altogether they're looking like that. Let's switch back to our camera view. So I've turned back on my walls and it's now looking like this. Let's actually take that light. Where's the light? Let's bring it up to the top so we can work on it more easily. Let's just reduce that intensity down to 20 so we get a better sense of this. Okay, what I should have done originally with this first emitter was to add a scale over life to it. So let's do that now, and we can just copy it onto the others. So we'll come to behaviors, and we want to come to particles and scale over life. What we're going to do is have a custom increment type, which allows us to open this up and set our own scale over life path. So hold down the Option key and set a keyframe sort of roughly here, and set that scale value to 100. Let's maybe set that over life position to be exactly 25. Let's draw around those end keyframes there and set that custom scale down to 50. So what I didn't do this right. That should have been 100. For some reason it's come out as 10. So 100 for that, 50 for the end, and also here, draw around the first lot and set that custom scale to 50. So you'll see that they kind of, oh, actually, only one of them so far. This one here is starting to increase in scale over life. And then at the end, it starts to decrease in scale, and we get that nice feathering. So all we need to do is hold down the Option key and drag that onto the other two emitters. So Option, drag it onto that one, and Option, drag it onto this one. And now they're all got that same nice scale over life behavior. So what I haven't yet done, obviously, is I haven't set a color for my third emitter. So let's do that. And let's make this kind of pinky like that. Okay, so next what I want to do is I want to add some lights to these emitters. And in fact, let's actually use the light that we've already got. And what I'm going to do is for its color, I'm going to pick one of my emitters, so like that, pick that one. And what I want to do is add its intensity to a rig. So right click, add to rig. Don't want to make a new rig. We want to add to a new slider. And then what we're going to do is come back to the light, right click, duplicate. Let's pick this color here, the blue one. Let's right click, duplicate, and let's pick our pinky color like that. And what I should probably also have done is set their fall off to 5 when I was at it. But let's just go through and set each of those fall offs to 5. And then what we need to do is we need to match the position of these lights to their respective emitters. So I'm going to select the first light and come to motion tracking and match move. And I'm going to grab that first emitter as the source for it. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the next light. So come to motion tracking, match move, select my next emitter, add it in there. And my third light, motion tracking, match move, and add in my third emitter like that. And now you can see how much better that's looking because they're all kind of off in different places and they're nicely tracking the growing movement of the lines. So then I want to keyframe the intensity of these lights, and that's why we added them to a slider. So let's come to that slider 1. We could call this lights, just so we know which one it is. So with this first tab selected here, let's select each of these values to 0. I can just easily tab through them if I want to do it very quickly. I'm going to select the second tab there, or I don't know what they're called. Anyway, that little dot there, and that's at 100, and that's good. So let's come back to the first frame of the sequence. Let's set a keyframe. Let's drag this down to 0. Obviously, we want it to be 0 there. I'm going to come forward to, I think, about 5 seconds and set this value here to 20%, which was the agreed value that we had for it. And now you can see how that's brightening up like that. Actually, we might even come to something like 10 seconds and brighten it up even more. Let's go for like 30 here. And then as they start to fade, we want them to fade out. So let's come to the last frame and set that down to 0. So now they're looking like that. I think the life of my lines is a little bit too long, and we probably still want a little bit of light at the end here. So let's set that to maybe 5 or even 10, just so there's a little bit of light left. But, those lights are now kind of following the intensity of the paths. So we've got another slider here, and that was for the particle birth rate, wasn't it? So let's call that particle, and let's do the same thing here. At the start, let's set this value to 0. Well, not at the start, but with this first little dot selected, let's set it to 0, I should say. Let's come to the last one. I might just set this value higher, so we've got something to play with if we needed it. So let's set all of those to 240, like so. And actually, let's change that maximum range to 240, so that actually reflects the reality of the situation, the reality of this slider. So at 7 seconds, I'm going to hit a keyframe, and I'm going to set this value to, I think 120 was probably more than enough particles. We don't want to kind of overdo it. And then I'm going to come forward to 8 seconds, and then I'm going to set this particle value down to 0, because there's no point in carrying on generating particles once the paths are complete. So those two rigs were actually quite handy, as you see. We could control all 3 values with the one slider. So next, let's look at adding some glow to these particles, or these shapes rather. But first of all, I need to set their blend mode to add. So I'm going to select all of these emitters, and come over to the blend mode and set it to add. And you can see what that does is it makes them more like light in the sense that they're not kind of just sitting over the top of each other, they're blending with each other. So obviously, if you've followed any of my tutorials, you'll know that the thing that I grab at this point is Filters Hawaii Super Glow. And immediately, without my having to do anything at all, it just looks fantastic. But let's not do that because you probably don't want to go out and buy that. So let us instead fudge it with the neon filter. So let's, with the group selected, let's come to Filters and Glow and Neon. This obviously looks terrible. What we're going to have to do is set the outer glow value to 200. The edge intensity, let's come down to maybe 4. And let's set the mix value down to something like 20. That sort of tames it a little bit. What we then really have to do is we have to go into these emitters and adjust their colours just so they're balanced a bit. I think this one here is just a little bit too bright. So I think probably increasing the saturation is going to help a bit. As I say, it just doesn't look very good. There's only so far you can actually go with neon, but there you go. So I've switched back to Super Glow because I just can't bear looking at the horrible neon result. But let's now add one more element to this group with the emitters in it. And so let's come down and select the circle tool and holding down the shift key, draw out a small circle like that. The radius we're going to have 20. And we want to come and set its position up. So just reset it. And that'll put it dead center of where those shapes are being emitted from. And obviously we need to turn off its lighting so it's a nice shining ball like that. And let's also come to 3 seconds on the timeline or thereabouts and keyframe its scale at 100%. Let's come to the start and set that value down to 10. Just going to turn off the 3D overlays. You can see we start with that little point there that grows like that. Obviously we'll need to consider having it fade off, and I think we'll have it start to fade off somewhere around 10 seconds. So let's come to 10 seconds, set a scale keyframe, and then come forward to around 14 seconds and set that scale value down to 0. So as the shapes themselves start to dissipate, so that will disappear as well. So next I want to show you how to make a reflection on the floor. And because I was rather freestyling the creation of these shapes, I need to actually adjust them a bit. So they're actually kind of extending off the bottom of the frame, and really I want them to kind of not be too much further down than, say, this line here that I'm showing you now. So I'm just going to spend a couple of moments adjusting those shapes till that is the case. So this is a little bit better. It means I can actually now show you how to do the reflection, which is a sort of a cheat. So I'm going to close down this group. That's the group that's got all of these shapes in it. And let's close down that background group as well. So let's actually just now make a clone of this shapes group. So right click, make clone layer. Obviously the first thing we want to do is to turn off the lighting. So let's come down to the lighting for that clone and turn it off. Then we want to flip it vertically. So let's do that by coming to the Y scale and setting this value to -100. Now you'll notice that because I've cloned the group to which the glow is applied, it's giving us this frame here that we don't actually want. So what I actually need to do is I need to create a group within this group that I can clone. So within this group, I'm going to make a new group like that. Let's move it to the top to make it easier. And I'm going to put that circle and the 3 emitters inside this group. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this group to make the clone. So I'm going to select that group and drag it onto the clone like that. And you can see the difference that makes because it's now no longer having the glow applied. So then let's come back to the clone. So the next thing we need to do is to move it down on Y. And now I happen to know that the right number is 850 for what I've just done. But basically what you want to do is you want to make sure the glow is sitting on the floor area and not above it, and I think that's probably going to be about right. So then what we need to do is blur the group that we have got our clone in. So come to blur and Gaussian blur, And I'm going to set this to something like 150. And that's not looking like a true reflection just yet. And that's because we also need to add an image mask to this group. So right click, add image mask. And we're going to dive all the way down into the background group here, which has got our environment in it. And I'm going to select that floor and drag it into the mask source, so the floor texture. Adding it to the mask source turns it off, so we need to turn it back on again. And then we need to switch to luminance for the mask. And as soon as I've done that, you can see how that works. We've now got this sort of textured reflection. So we just need to come back to the image mask and apply a color levels to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to crunch in the blacks like this, and then we just get more of the texture. And if I want to reduce the intensity of the reflection, I can use this control, this white control, just to dial it back a bit. So then what I want to do is to add a camera. So let's add the camera like that. And let's first of all set the angle of view. Let's go for 75 for the angle of view, because this is really going to exaggerate the depth of the particles. And you can probably already see how that's working. So let's come to its position. I'm going to set a Y position of -250, a Z position of 300, and an X rotation of -8. So then let's add some animation to the camera. So I'm going to come to behaviors, camera, and sweep. The values I want here are a start of -20 and an end of +20. I'm also going to add a camera dolly. So what I'm going to go for is probably something like 1,000 for the dolly. Let's just see how that works as we get towards the end. I think I probably want to also be moving upwards. So let's add a throw behavior to the camera. So basic motion throw, and let's ramp to final value, open up the throw distance. So we need to be coming up on Y, so let's maybe try 300. How's that? I think that's probably quite good. So then what actually happens, obviously I can't play this for you just yet, but you can see that as I scrub through, we're getting this sort of interesting movement around. And so really the only other thing that I actually now want to do is I want to add a foreground to this. So I'm going to come to like around a second into the timeline, and I'm going to come to import. In my assets folder, I'm going to look for front wall, bring that in. Where has it gone? Obviously it's gone into the wrong place, so let's drag it out of that group there. Don't want it in that group, I want it in a group on its own. And I'm going to bring that group right out to the top like that. So with this new group selected, I'm going to bring it forward 1,000 pixels on Z, and I'm going to bring it across on X to something like -850. And I think that's probably going to be about right. So what it will do is create this nice little reveal as our animation begins. What I also want to do is to this front wall add a nice big fat blur. So blur, Gaussian blur. I think probably an amount of 64 is going to be good. And you can see how that's giving us this nice sort of depth of field on that. Now, the problem we have at the moment is it's not illuminated. It's kind of this black box, and we're not getting the most out of this nice texture. So what I can do is add a new light, and the light wants to be very faint. So I'm going to go for 10% on the value, and then I'm going to move it way out on Z. So it's only illuminating this wall. So something like 2000 is probably going to be quite good. Just have a check that it's not illuminating too much of the background. I think it probably is. So to change that, let's adjust the fall off. So if we go for maybe a fall off of 5 like that, we're really just illuminating this front wall. So I've probably gone overboard with that Gaussian blur. So let's back off on that amount to something like 32. And so we're getting a little bit more sense of that texture. So the only thing that I'm not going to show you, but that I did in my version, was that I added in some 3D dust particles, which always help with the sense of depth. But I think this tutorial has probably gone on way longer than it should have already, so I'm not going to show you that. But there is one final detail that I'd like to mention, and that's that if we want to have jagged paths, we can do that really quite easily. So if we come down to the emitter, come to behaviors and come to parameter and wriggle, what we can do is apply this wriggle behavior. So I'm going to set that to add and subtract, probably set that amount down to something like 75. And then here under apply to, I'll go to properties, transform, position, X and Y, and you can see that one of these paths now has got this kind of crazy wriggly behavior, like a sort of lightning strike or something. Not a look I'd particularly go for, but it might be useful to you. So just thought I'd mention that as well. So here's the final result, and I hope it's been worth sticking around with it. It's a pretty interesting effect, I think. So thanks very much indeed for watching. See you again soon.